Hello and welcome to the Clear Crypto podcast, brought to you by Starkware and Cointelegraph. No jargon, no hype, just straight talk on what crypto and blockchain do today and what they're going to do tomorrow. Clear and crypto, if those two words sound like a contradiction in terms, you are in the right place. And if you're experienced already in this world, you will know that one of our great challenges is to share our passion for this world with others without frying their brains. And here we are on a mission to work out how to do that best. So stick with us. I'm Nathan, a journalist who's fallen into blockchain. In the last few episodes, we've been exploring where blockchain came from, what it's all about, what the values are. And today I'm really excited because we're going to be joined by someone on the show who was there in the very early days and can tell us about those early times of blockchain, of Bitcoin, and is very active today on shaping its future. Dan Held is one of the best known educators and advocates of Bitcoin. He has this real flair for breaking down the complex ideas into insights that anyone can grasp. He's had this remarkably versatile career path. He's a serial entrepreneur with successful exits under his belt. He was director of growth marketing at Kraken during that wild 2020-2021 bull run. And he's now working on all sorts of interesting projects that will shape the future of Bitcoin, including advising Starkware, where I work on efforts to scale Bitcoin for mass use. Gareth, how are you doing?
I'm very well, Nathan. Looking forward to this episode.
Yeah, me too. Anyone interested in crypto, I think, has this fascination with talking to people who got into it early. So I'm very excited to speak to Dan Held, who has, I think, been in crypto since before Satoshi Nakamoto himself. We'll check in with him in a few moments. But Gareth, when you look back on the history of Bitcoin, on the past of Bitcoin, what are the kind of things that make you really curious as to what it was like in the early days, what people were thinking about back then?
I remember watching Zeitgeist in my first year as a university student in 2009. And one of the big parts of this documentary was exploring the history of money and how the US Federal Reserve works. And at the time, I was too young to even fathom these things properly. In the background, in the very same year, the Bitcoin network had started, and cypherpunks and cryptographers were getting on board and really understanding the implications of a purely peer-to-peer monetary network. I've now spent a load of time reading all these early emails, all the early forums, and I just have FOMO, having not had the foresight to get involved or understand what it was back then. I think that's why I'm excited to chat to Dan today, because he is one of those people that got involved within the first 4 years of Bitcoin's Genesis block. I'm really keen to hear from him what it was like back then.
Yeah, and it's funny to hear you speak about, hey, I have this sense of FOMO of not having got involved then, because as we're speaking now, we can almost feel people 5 years down the line going, 2025, I feel the FOMO now. Why didn't I get involved then? Why didn't I start listening to the Clear Crypto podcast to find out about it then? So if you're listening, you're in the right place. Don't go away. Let's meet Dan. Dan Held, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Wonderful. So let's get started and ask you, we stand at this very interesting, exciting juncture today where crypto is more discussed in the United States and around the world than it ever has been. Can you give us a bit of a description of what the dynamic is like, who is getting excited about it, who is a little bit cautious about it, and who is just open and wanting to learn more?
Well, I would say retail still hasn't come back this cycle yet. This bull run so far has been largely institutional, and those folks already paying attention. We haven't seen a huge new wave of retail come back in yet. By the way, those who are paying attention is still a very large swath and percentage of Americans. It's estimated that 25% of Americans own Bitcoin. So the idea that a new wave hasn't come in yet isn't necessarily that big of a deal because there's already quite a few people paying attention. In regards to those paying attention, this is probably one of the most exciting moments in Bitcoin's history. You have to remember too, and we'll go back to the past in a second, that Bitcoin had all sorts of trials and tribulations to make its way to this moment now, including the Civil War in 2017 with Bitcoin Cash, including moments where China attacked Bitcoin and shut down Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin spot trading, and the US government. The Biden administration was incredibly harsh and wanted to try to destroy Bitcoin, including destroying some of the banks that serviced the crypto sector. Right now, we have the most, I would say, open administration towards Bitcoin in the United States, and that sets a great tone for regulation across the world. The United States typically leads with our regulatory guidance on financial matters, and other countries follow. And it kind of feels weird, to be honest, where we're not the bad guys. Normally in the press, Bitcoin mining is destroying the environment. It's being used by money launderers and drug dealers, and it's just a speculative pump and dump asset. And instead, you've got the president owning Bitcoin. You've got the president encouraging Bitcoin. In terms of a moment in crypto's history and Bitcoin's history, this is the best moment you could imagine.
Yeah, and seeing the ecosystem blossom, Gareth, what do Bitcoiners mean when they say, see the ecosystem blossom? Talk to us a little bit about what we can see coming out of Bitcoin beyond, price predictions.
Yeah, price is just a reflection on the underlying belief in what Bitcoin is. I, for one, tend to not focus on the value of Bitcoin, but it is an indicator of who's looking at it and what it can do. And what does it really mean? It means that people are now having the freedom to have a protocol that allows you to transfer value peer-to-peer trustlessly without a third party to tell you can or can't or process those transactions is incredibly powerful. And I had a very interesting conversation with a few people in the United States when I was there in New York for Anthony Pompliano's Investor Week. And one of the big problems here was the debanking crisis, right? Very big institutions like Custodia Bank not being able to have a banking license and offer tools and services that would have helped people either use Bitcoin or store Bitcoin. So if we're moving forward in a direction that is allowing people more freedom to use technologies that give them ultimate control of their money, that is the best case scenario for this industry. And to be honest, I think it's pretty unprecedented. If you rewind the clock a year, no one would have seen this kind of thing happening. And I think that's been the most exciting thing the past 6 months in this industry.
So let's actually get into that story. And can we join you in the Dan-held time machine and travel back and back and back all the way to the first time that you heard about Bitcoin? Set the scene for us. Tell us how it came to you.
Yeah, so my journey was very unique compared to most users' journeys into Bitcoin, especially over the last decade. I was studying finance in undergrad during the 2008 financial crisis. So for me, everyone that I was listening to, whether it be professors, TV, and the books I was reading, they were all wrong. They were fundamentally wrong about the existing financial system, and trust had been lost in a world that ran on trust. And so I was already radicalized in a way, radicalized and knowledgeable. Most people on the street have no idea how the existing financial system works, nor do they care. They just kind of wake up and they're like, it works. I can pull dollars out of my bank. And they don't really think about how structurally deficient it was in 2008 and how much it had been broken. So Bitcoin comes along 3-4 years later. My mind was sort of ripe for that opportunity. So that's what I mean by very unique. And because of that, I'd become a fan of Austrian economics, which is a more laissez-faire approach, where we believe that governments shouldn't be involved with the regulation of monetary policy, the issuance of money, etc. So I was already a libertarian gold bug Austrian economist sort of type. So probably the perfect product market fit for a person like that was Bitcoin, right? Even though I was the perfect fit for it, it still took me about a year. I first heard about it in 2011, and there wasn't any content on how to use it. And my engineering buddy walked me through it. That's how it worked back then.
The complexity could be likened to, the days when if you wanted to get medicine, you had to go into a pharmacy and they had to actually mix the medicines and prepare the herbs and that kind of thing. It's difficult to kind of imagine back to that if you weren't there, right?
It's pretty hard to describe to people nowadays. A lot of friction in that. The friction represented the opportunity, though. The friction in understanding Bitcoin and the friction in using it is the alpha. That's it. Bitcoin's code hasn't changed that much since then. I mean, barely has changed. It's that more and more people, and the reason why Bitcoin's price is at $93,000 today, is that the world has come to recognize Bitcoin's value. But the breakthrough moment for me, the aha moment, was the monetary policy, the 21 million hard cap. That was it. But the 21 million hard cap, what that means is that there will only be 21 million Bitcoin. The monetary policy of the United States and other countries are that they will continue to print money, aka the rate of inflation. If you notice that your dollars, pounds, yen, euros buy you less and less a year, that's due to inflation, and that's because they're printing more and more of it. We have just gotten used to this paradigm that our money is worth less every year. But in fact, that's not the case in history. On gold standards, money held its value consistently over hundreds of years. The 21 million hard cap, what's brilliant is that 21 million is a fixed quantity, which makes everything calculable in the economy. It means it's incredibly simple and trustworthy monetary policy. As long as that doesn't change, more and more faith, aka more and more value, flows into Bitcoin over time versus fiat money, which can be changed on a dime. And so the monetary policy is a huge breakthrough.
So we're going to need to jump around a little bit. You've given us some very convincing thoughts on why Bitcoin is so important. But I'm fascinated also in what you're doing today, because today you are a very big advocate for actually making Bitcoin do more. You work with various companies, including Stockware, where I work, where there are efforts to scale Bitcoin, as in bring it more capacity to serve more people. So tell us a little bit about how we're going to see Bitcoin unfold and kind of, emerge from its corner.
Yeah, I'll tell you why this is important. Bitcoin truly will be digital gold someday, which will be the foundation for our economy and the foundation for money across the world. Now, how do we have people discover why Bitcoin is valuable? Most people come for the speculation and then they stay for the sound money. And so speculation, while some people consider it a dirty word, it's the word and it's the description of how most people found Bitcoin. Decentralized finance, so switching gears over to decentralized finance or DeFi, those different speculative mechanics or speculative instruments, lending, borrowing, staking, things like that, that led a lot of people to discover Ethereum and Solana. And so my thought was if we could bring these back to Bitcoin, then Bitcoin could utilize not just spot speculation, so spot is just betting on Bitcoin's value going up and down, but these other speculative games, then that would allow Bitcoin to grow even faster. So if they speculate, but they still hold Bitcoin at the end of the day, that's a good thing. So that's why I think DeFi on top of Bitcoin is valuable, is that it sort of accelerates Bitcoin's timeline and brings all these financial primitives back to Bitcoin to utilize Bitcoin in different types of financial transactions.
So you're essentially working on, advocating for building on top of Bitcoin, all sorts of functionalities. So, lending, borrowing, and much more, some of which we'll be talking about in detail in our next episode. Gareth, is there a lot of excitement among the crypto following public about these types of things?
Yeah, I think knowing what you can do in other blockchain protocols makes people very excited about tapping into the security of the Bitcoin network and the underlying incredible store of value that Bitcoin is, right? If you can use that and bring DeFi to it, you're basically allowing people to use, like Dan said, digital gold as the underlying asset to borrow from or use to power other sort of decentralized finance tools or services. So it's a very hard thing to do as well, because most hardcore Bitcoin maximalists don't want people to have to give up their Bitcoin for something else. Having worked at Cointelegraph for a long time, we've seen all the controversy that you've courted over the years with, ordinals and all of that. And I, for one, look at that from the outside and think we should have an open mind to innovation, because if you don't innovate, you're never really going to push the needle. Things will just remain the same forever. But I hear the arguments for the why. Why do we need NFTs on Bitcoin if Bitcoin's supposed to be hard money? It's a good argument, but at the same time, if Casey Rodarmer hadn't invented the Bitcoin ordinals protocol, people wouldn't have realized that they can inscribe arbitrary data on a single Satoshi. And for our viewers out there, like, one Bitcoin is made up out of 100 million Satoshis. I mean, if you put your mind to it, there's a million different things you could potentially do with that. Some people started with art. And I guess I wanted to pose this question to Dan is, how do you deal with a lot of the negativity that you got from the wider Bitcoin community when you started endorsing these kind of innovations? Because there was a lot of hesitation from a lot of hardcore Bitcoiners.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I've been at these sort of crossroads a few times. One was the Bitcoin Cash hard fork, So Bitcoin Cash was this civil war basically that occurred in Bitcoin, and it was sort of brother against brother. I mean, you got to remember that like Roger Ver bought my first company. We spent a lot of time in Yorkshire. Yorkshire is where the blockchain.com headquarters was, where it was CZ, Roger, myself, and others. And, one of us is crashing on the couch and the other one's crashing on an air mattress to save money. So Bitcoin Cash hard fork war, that was very brutal. TLDR argument, Bitcoin Cash, which is the hard fork. So it's like, imagine a community forked into two, like a civil war. The Bitcoin Cash community thought that Bitcoin's best use was to be a cheap PayPal, and that Bitcoin should increase its block size or its bandwidth to accept more transactions to have lower fees. I think that's the best summation I can do in a short period of time. There's a lot of nuance lost here. The Bitcoin small blockers, which I was a part of, which is what Bitcoin is today, we said, well, no, Bitcoin's values as goal 2.0. It's clearly disrupting money versus disrupting payment methods is a far greater value of Bitcoin, and also is how Bitcoin was constructed. So that was an easy decision. But the flack I got from that, it was like 4 or 5 years of flack, which is pretty intense. I've gone through this before. So this hard fork in the road with Bitcoin isn't a hard fork. So there's no one's proposing to change the rules of Bitcoin. That's what the Bitcoin Cash community changed the rules of Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin community disagreed. What's happening now is that there is I would call them Bitcoin Puritans versus Bitcoin moderates. Bitcoin Puritans are like, stay off my blockchain. I just want to use it for payments, which funnily enough is basically the argument that Bitcoin Cashers used. And they're like, well, Bitcoin's primary utility is for payments, and anything else like NFTs or speculative activity is a bad thing, which is kind of ridiculous because Bitcoin's original block space usage, what did people use Bitcoin for originally? I was there. It was buying drugs and gambling. There was no kumbaya moment of people buying fruit in the market with Bitcoin. Anyways, so the Puritans are like, anything NFT related is a scam. They're supposedly open market, free market advocates. Free market advocates advocate that the government nor anyone else should tell you what to do with your money, which I wholeheartedly agree with, and what was the original ethos of Bitcoin. But the Puritans disagree with that. They believe that they should morally justify transactions. Unfortunately, this was caused by Saifedean. Saifedean was the writer of the Bitcoin Standard, which introduced this philosophy to the Bitcoin community, which didn't exist before, by the way, because I've been there since almost the beginning, to moralize transaction types, because he started to say that certain transaction types and activities in the human world were due to fiat, which I find a little bit reductive and just kind of ridiculous. So anyways, we're at a crossroads here. The Bitcoin moderates are advocating for soft fork proposals. Soft forks are not hard forks. Soft forks, basically, it's a much gentler version where the network doesn't split in two. The network is still the same network, but people can opt into the new soft fork proposal. There's different soft forks that allow Bitcoin to fulfill, I would say, its social obligations. So Bitcoin's code is changed based on social consensus, which means if enough of us want to change it, it changes. And there's been small changes to it over time. Things like the monetary policy have never been changed, which is the most important part, but little tweaks here and there to fix bugs and stuff like that. With Bitcoin on the base layer, we're never going to be able to do every transaction in the world in the base layer. There's too many people, not enough space. So Bitcoin, we agreed upon during the hard fork wars about 7-8 years ago, we agreed that Bitcoin would scale in layers. That was what the small blockers, or the community that won and what Bitcoin is today, agreed upon. Unfortunately, there's not good connectivity from Bitcoin's base layer to these L2s. And these L2s would allow for the burgeoning of different economic activity, Starkware being one of them.
L2s are what would essentially allow you to compress transactions to fit more into blockchain without compromising its security or its ethos.
That's exactly right. Think about it in the traditional dollar world or yen world. It's like it's doing a wire would be the Bitcoin base layer for big transactions, and then maybe you do ACH or Venmo or PayPal for transactions on top of that, which would be like layer 2. So basically on layer 2, transactions can occur back and forth, and then on certain moments they settle onto the Bitcoin base layer. So layer 2s are how Bitcoin will scale. This is also how other blockchains have scaled, like Ethereum. Unfortunately, the connectivity between Bitcoin's L1 and L2s are not as strong as we would like them to be. And so if all this economic activity is going to happen on these Bitcoin L2s, we need to strengthen that. Well, the Bitcoin moderates say, well, look, There's some code that Satoshi originally put into Bitcoin called OPCAT. What if we brought back that code and we could make trustless bridges? Bridges are bridging you from the L1 to the L2. This would adhere to the social consensus that everyone agreed upon. We want Bitcoin to scale with layers. Cool. We all agreed. And we want to make that really strong. Well, then how do we do that? Well, you can do that via like 10 lines of code that was originally in Bitcoin that Satoshi took out because he didn't understand it fully. And we can bring that back in. These small tweaks to Bitcoin, which don't change anything about the monetary policy, don't change the core fundamentals of Bitcoin, just increase its ability to scale.
Remarkable hearing about the future challenges of Bitcoin from someone who has been involved so long and seen so much. Gareth, there are so many more questions that I would like to ask Dan. There is so much more I would like to dig into. I feel we're just getting started here, but we do need to wrap up for today. Gareth, a closing thought, a closing pearl of wisdom for our listeners?
Yeah, I think more than anything, it's important that everyone has an open mind and considers all the different avenues that are at play here. At the end of the day, Bitcoin has proved itself via its fundamentals that it's a fantastic store of value. It's the most secure peer-to-peer network that exists. And we should be pushing the envelope in whichever way we can. But at the end of the day, consensus rules, and the network and its participants will decide what happens with Bitcoin. And I think that's the beauty of it. There's many people that advocate for different things for Bitcoin. I think we all just want to see the world have a better form of money. Bitcoin has proven that it's that. Whether or not you use it to pay for coffees in the future or use it to borrow against to do whatever you want to do with that money, buy a house, the future looks really bright. And I have no doubt in 5 years, we will have solved many of these problems. And we will have a fantastic sound monetary base to use that's completely digital, that's completely peer-to-peer and has no central authority managing it. And that, for me, makes me really, really optimistic for the future. And again, just want to say thanks to Dan for his time and his wisdom. It's always great to chat to people that have been around for a long time. Even though you've courted a lot of controversy and your own amount of heat, you still have a smile on your face and you're still here. And I think that's a great thing.
Talking to the two of you, I really feel we're seeing this remarkable experiment unfolding in front of our eyes, and it is such an exciting time to actually witness it. And we will take you all the way through that journey here on the Clear Crypto podcast. Recommend it to your friends, whether they are crypto native and want to think and really work with the idea of how we communicate clearly on all of this to the outside, or whether you're new to all of this, this is the place that you're going to get all the background that you need. Both of you, tell us where we can find you in the world of social media.
I'm at Gaza_Jenks on X.
Well, mine's easy. It's at Dan Held on Twitter or danheld.com, which is my website where you can read some of my blog posts.
Find Dan Held on Twitter, find Gareth on Twitter, find all of the past episodes of this podcast. This has been the Clear Crypto podcast, brought to you by Starkware and Cointelegraph, and produced by our wonderful friends over at Tonal Media. Join us next time. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, stay curious.